My best friend Sophia was sleeping with my husband Jake for 8 months while planning my surprise birthday party, and when I finally caught them, her husband Marcus didn't just help me get revenge. He orchestrated a plan so brilliant, it left both cheaters begging us to stop. What started as a devastating betrayal turned into the most satisfying partnership I never saw coming, and by the time we were done, Sophia and Jake learned that some secrets have a way of destroying everything you think you've built. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in Cedar Park. I was rushing around our kitchen, trying to find my portfolio for a client presentation, while Jake sat at the breakfast bar, scrolling through his phone with that distant expression he'd been wearing for months. Steam rose from his untouched coffee mug, and I remember thinking how even our morning routine felt mechanical lately, like we were two actors going through the motions of a marriage we'd memorized but stopped feeling. Jake worked construction, starting his days before dawn, so our brief morning overlap had always been precious to me. We used to talk about our plans, share coffee, steal quick kisses before rushing off to our separate worlds. But recently, these moments felt hollow. He'd grunt responses to my questions about his day, barely look up from whatever was apparently so fascinating on his phone, and leave with a perfunctory peck on my cheek that felt more like checking a box than showing affection. That particular morning, as I gathered my design samples for a presentation to a new restaurant chain, Jake suddenly straightened up, his attention fully focused on his screen. A smile spread across his face, the first genuine expression of happiness I'd seen from him in weeks. For a split second, I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe whatever had been bothering him was resolving itself. Maybe we were finally going to get back to being us. Then he quickly turned the phone face down and cleared his throat, the smile vanishing so completely I almost wondered if I'd imagined it. When our eyes met, there was something there I'd never seen before, guilt, maybe, or fear. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual morning indifference, but that brief flash of something hidden sent a chill down my spine. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Coffee at Central Perk at 10? Need my bestie's advice on something important. I showed Jake the message, hoping to recapture some normalcy. Sophia wants to meet for coffee. She says it's important. Jake's reaction was subtle but telling. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and he took a sudden interest in his coffee, wrapping both hands around the mug like it was anchoring him. Probably wedding planning stuff for someone, he said, his voice carefully neutral. You know how she gets about other people's relationships. The comment struck me as odd. Sophia was a real estate agent, not a wedding planner, and while she was enthusiastic about romance, she wasn't particularly invested in other people's relationship dramas. But I was already running late, and the strangeness of Jake's response got filed away in the growing collection of things that didn't quite make sense anymore. I grabbed my keys and portfolio, pausing at the door for our usual goodbye ritual. Jake stood and walked over, but instead of the warm embrace we used to share, he gave me that same mechanical kiss on the cheek. His cologne was different, something expensive and unfamiliar. When I mentioned it, he shrugged and said his sister had given it to him for his birthday last month. Another small detail that felt off, since Jake's birthday wasn't until November, and it was only March. Central Perk Cafe occupied a converted house near downtown Austin, all exposed brick and mismatched furniture that made it feel like someone's eccentric living room. Sophia was already there when I arrived, sitting at our usual corner table with 2 drinks waiting. She looked polished as always, her black hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless despite the early hour, wearing a designer blouse that probably cost more than my monthly coffee budget. Real estate had been good to her, and she never let anyone forget it. But something was different about her demeanor. Usually, Sophia commanded attention effortlessly, her laugh loud and infectious, her gestures animated, as she told stories that made everyone around her feel included in some exclusive joke. Today, she seemed almost nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring and barely making eye contact. You look tired, she said as I sat down, which was Sophia's way of expressing concern without admitting she was worried. How are things with Jake? The question felt loaded, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Fine, I said automatically, then reconsidered. If anyone would understand marriage challenges, it would be Sophia. She and Marcus had been through their own rough patches, particularly around their struggles with fertility. Actually, maybe not fine. He's been distant lately. Distracted. We barely talk anymore. Sophia's expression shifted to something that looked like sympathy, but there was an undertone I couldn't identify. Men go through phases, she said, stirring her latte with unusual intensity. Marcus was like that last year when work was stressing him out. Sometimes they need space to figure things out. I nodded, wanting to believe her reassurance, but something about her tone felt rehearsed. Have you noticed anything when we all hang out? Like, does Jake seem different to you? For just a moment, Sophia's composure cracked. Her stirring stopped, and she looked genuinely uncomfortable before recovering with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're probably overthinking it, Em. Marriage is hard work. Maybe you two just need to reconnect. Plan a romantic weekend or something. The conversation moved on to safer topics. Her latest real estate deals, my design projects, plans for our monthly game night group. But that moment of discomfort lingered in my mind. Sophia was many things, but she wasn't typically evasive. She was the friend who told you exactly what she thought, sometimes more bluntly than you wanted to hear. This careful diplomacy was unlike her. After coffee, I drove to my design studio feeling unsettled. The presentation went well. The restaurant owners loved my concept for their Austin location, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Not just with Jake, but with Sophia too. The two most important people in my life suddenly felt like strangers wearing familiar faces. My business partner Alex noticed my distraction immediately. We'd worked together for 3 years, building our small design firm from nothing into something we were genuinely proud of. Alex had a gift for reading people, which made him excellent at client relations and impossible to hide things from. "What's eating you?" he asked during our afternoon planning session. "You nailed the presentation, but you look like someone stole your dog." I found myself telling him about the morning's strange interactions, Jake's mysterious happiness followed by guilt, Sophia's nervous evasiveness. As I talked it through, the pieces started forming a picture I didn't want to see. "How long has Jake been acting different?" Alex asked, leaning back in his chair with a thoughtful expression that meant he was processing something significant. "A few months, maybe longer," I admitted. I kept thinking it was work stress or something. Construction can be unpredictable, and he's been taking on bigger projects. And Sophia? That's harder to pin down. She's been available. More available than usual. Suggesting we hang out more, asking about Jake's schedule, offering to help with things she normally wouldn't care about. Alex raised an eyebrow. Available how? She offered to dog sit when we went to San Antonio last month, even though she usually avoids our dogs because of her allergies. She's been texting more, calling to check in on random things. Last week she stopped by with groceries she claimed were extras, but they were all Jake's favorite brands. Speaking it out loud made the pattern impossible to ignore. Sophia's increased attention wasn't random kindness. It was intelligence gathering. She'd been inserting herself into our lives more deliberately, learning our routines, our schedules, our habits. The helpful friend act was actually surveillance. "Emma," Alex said gently, "I think you know what this looks like." I did know, but knowing and accepting are two different things. The possibility that Jake was cheating felt like a betrayal of everything I thought I knew about him, about us. We'd built our relationship on trust and communication. We'd weathered his father's death, my mother's cancer scare, financial struggles when the housing market crashed and his construction work dried up. We were the couple other people looked to, as proof that lasting love was possible. But the possibility that Sophia was involved felt like something else entirely. A betrayal so fundamental it challenged everything I believed about friendship, loyalty, and the people I'd chosen to trust with my deepest vulnerabilities. Sophia knew everything about my marriage, my fears, my insecurities. She'd been there through every fight Jake and I had ever had, offering advice and support and reassurance that we'd work things out. If she was sleeping with him, it meant every conversation we'd had about my relationship had been a performance, every piece of advice, a manipulation. That evening, I decided to test my suspicions. Jake usually worked late on Tuesdays, not coming home until after 7. I called him at 6:30, expecting to hear the background noise of a construction site or his truck radio. Instead, the call went straight to voicemail, and when he called back 20 minutes later, I could hear music and conversation in the background that sounded distinctly like a restaurant or bar. "Sorry, babe," he said, and his voice had that overly casual tone people use when they're working hard to sound normal. "Phone died and I just plugged it in. Still dealing with some permit issues on the downtown site." "I can hear music," I said, keeping my own voice light and curious rather than accusatory. A brief pause. "Yeah, we're at that sports bar near the site, waiting for the city inspector to call us back. You know how these things go." I did know how these things went, because I'd been married to a construction foreman for 8 years. City inspectors didn't work past 5 o'clock, and they definitely didn't take calls at sports bars. But instead of confronting the lie directly, I filed it away with all the other small deceptions that were building into something too big to ignore. When Jake finally came home that night, he was showered and changed, smelling like that unfamiliar cologne again. His story about the permit issues was elaborate and detailed, full of specific names and bureaucratic complications that would be impossible to verify without calling his boss directly. He'd gotten good at lying, I realized. Too good. This wasn't the clumsy deception of someone new to betrayal. This was practiced, confident, the kind of smooth dishonesty that came from months of perfecting the performance. I lay awake that night beside my husband, listening to his breathing and wondering how long he'd been living this double life. Had he always been capable of this level of deception, and I'd just never seen it? Or had something fundamental changed in him, some line crossed that made betraying me feel justified or necessary? More troubling was the growing certainty that Sophia was involved. The nervous energy at coffee, the increased attention to our lives, the way she'd carefully steered our conversation away from examining Jake's behavior too closely. It all pointed to someone with inside knowledge and personal investment in keeping me from discovering the truth. As I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept circling through my mind. If Jake and Sophia were having an affair, what did that mean for Marcus? Was he as oblivious as I'd been? Or was he already dealing with his own suspicions? The idea that there might be someone else navigating the same betrayal gave me a strange sense of comfort. At least I wouldn't be facing this alone. I had no idea how right I was, or how much Marcus already knew. The next few days passed in a haze of forced normalcy, while I quietly began paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. Jake's patterns became clearer when viewed through the lens of suspicion. His Tuesday late nights weren't isolated incidents. They happened every week, along with Thursday afternoon delays and the occasional Saturday morning emergency call that required him to leave for hours. What I'd attributed to the demanding nature of construction work now looked like a carefully orchestrated schedule, designed to create consistent opportunities for deception. Meanwhile, Sophia's behavior took on new significance. She called Wednesday morning, ostensibly to check on how my restaurant presentation had gone, but her questions quickly shifted to Jake's work schedule and whether we had plans for the weekend. When I mentioned that Jake had another emergency call Saturday morning, there was a brief pause before she suggested we have a girls' day instead. Lunch, shopping, maybe a movie. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I did know how these things went, because I'd been married to a construction foreman for 8 years. City inspectors didn't work past 5 o'clock, and they definitely didn't take calls at sports bars. But instead of confronting the lie directly, I filed it away with all the other small deceptions that were building into something too big to ignore. When Jake finally came home that night, he was showered and changed, smelling like that unfamiliar cologne again. His story about the permit issues was elaborate and detailed, full of specific names and bureaucratic complications that would be impossible to verify without calling his boss directly. He'd gotten good at lying, I realized. Too good. This wasn't the clumsy deception of someone new to betrayal. This was practiced, confident, the kind of smooth dishonesty that came from months of perfecting the performance. I lay awake that night beside my husband, listening to his breathing and wondering how long he'd been living this double life. Had he always been capable of this level of deception, and I'd just never seen it? Or had something fundamental changed in him, some line crossed that made betraying me feel justified or necessary. More troubling was the growing certainty that Sophia was involved. The nervous energy at coffee, the increased attention to our lives, the way she'd carefully steered our conversation away from examining Jake's behavior too closely. It all pointed to someone with inside knowledge and personal investment in keeping me from discovering the truth. As I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept circling through my mind. If Jake and Sophia were having an affair, what did that mean for Marcus? Was he as oblivious as I'd been? Or was he already dealing with his own suspicions? The idea that there might be someone else navigating the same betrayal gave me a strange sense of comfort. At least I wouldn't be facing this alone. I had no idea how right I was, or how much Marcus already knew. The next few days passed in a haze of forced normalcy, while I quietly began paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. Jake's patterns became clearer when viewed through the lens of suspicion. His Tuesday late nights weren't isolated incidents. They happened every week, along with Thursday afternoon delays and the occasional Saturday morning emergency call that required him to leave for hours. What I'd attributed to the demanding nature of construction work now looked like a carefully orchestrated schedule, designed to create consistent opportunities for deception. Meanwhile, Sophia's behavior took on new significance. She called Wednesday morning, ostensibly to check on how my restaurant presentation had gone, but her questions quickly shifted to Jake's work schedule and whether we had plans for the weekend. When I mentioned that Jake had another emergency call Saturday morning, there was a brief pause before she suggested we have a girls' day instead. Lunch, shopping, maybe a movie. Her eagerness to keep me occupied during Jake's mysterious absences felt less like friendship and more like coordination. Thursday evening brought the first concrete evidence I hadn't been looking for, but couldn't ignore. Jake was in the shower when his phone, charging on his nightstand, lit up with a text notification. The preview showed just enough to make my blood run cold. Can't wait for tomorrow night, same place as always? I've been thinking about you all day. The sender's name wasn't visible from where I stood frozen in the doorway, but I didn't need to see it to know this wasn't a message about construction delays or permit issues. The intimate tone, the anticipation, the reference to a regular meeting place, this was the language of an established affair, not a casual mistake or momentary lapse in judgment. My hands shook as I returned to the kitchen, pretending to busy myself with cleaning dishes that were already clean. When Jake emerged from the bathroom, I watched him check his phone, with the kind of eager attention he used to reserve for me. His smile was soft, private, the expression of someone lost in pleasant thoughts about another person. He typed a quick response, and I saw his thumb move in the familiar pattern of adding a heart emoji before hitting send. That night, I couldn't bring myself to lie next to him in our bed, knowing he was probably thinking about whoever had sent that message. I claimed a headache and settled on the living room couch with a book I couldn't focus on, listening to Jake move around upstairs with a lightness in his step I hadn't heard in months. Whatever was happening tomorrow night had him excited in a way that our anniversary dinner last month hadn't managed to achieve. Friday morning arrived with Jake whistling in the shower, a sound so foreign in our house lately that it actually startled me. He dressed with unusual care, selecting his best jeans and the button-down shirt I'd bought him for Christmas, the one he usually saved for special occasions. His cologne application was generous, and he spent extra time in front of the bathroom mirror, examining his reflection with the critical eye of someone preparing for an important encounter. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jake was putting more effort into his appearance for his secret meeting than he had for any evening with me in recent memory. When was the last time he'd dressed up for a date night? When had he last looked at himself in the mirror with that kind of anticipatory satisfaction before spending time with his wife? I made coffee and toast, going through the motions of our morning routine while studying this stranger who wore my husband's face. He was animated in a way I'd almost forgotten he could be, telling an elaborate story about a coworker's mishap with a cement mixer that would have been funny if I could focus on anything other than the knowledge that tonight he was planning to be with someone else. I might be late tonight, he said as he gathered his keys and wallet, not quite meeting my eyes. The Riverside project is behind schedule, and the contractor wants to push through some overtime to catch up. Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence as all the others. I nodded and kissed his cheek, tasting the lingering sweetness of his cologne, and wondering if this was how every betrayed spouse felt, like an unwitting participant in their own deception, forced to play along with a script they'd never agreed to read. After Jake left, I called in sick to work and spent the morning walking through our house like a detective at a crime scene, looking for evidence I'd been too trusting to notice before. In Jake's dresser drawer, beneath his usual collection of work-worn t-shirts, I found receipts for restaurants I'd never been to, charged to a credit card I didn't know existed. The dates corresponded with his Tuesday late nights and Thursday afternoon delays, painting a picture of regular dinner dates at establishments far too expensive and romantic for construction business meetings. One receipt in particular made my stomach clench: Romano's Italian Bistro, the same upscale restaurant where Jake had proposed to me 8 years ago. He'd taken someone else to our place, to the table where he'd gotten down on one knee and promised to love me forever. The date on the receipt was our wedding anniversary, when he'd claimed to be working late and came home with a wilted bouquet from a gas station and an apology about forgetting to make reservations anywhere nice. I photographed each receipt with my phone, building a file of evidence I wasn't sure I wanted to have. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation for all of this circumstantial proof, but the rational part of my mind, the part that had built a successful design business by paying attention to details and trusting my instincts, knew I was looking at the financial trail of a long-term affair. The credit card statements revealed more than just romantic dinners. There were hotel charges for places in Austin and nearby cities, florist purchases on dates that weren't my birthday or our anniversary, jewelry store transactions for amounts that suggested significant pieces I'd never received. Jake had been living an entirely separate financial life, funding a relationship I knew nothing about with money that should have been part of our shared future. Friday afternoon brought a text from Sophia. "Hope you have a relaxing evening. Marcus is working late on some security project, so I'm having a quiet night at home with a bottle of wine and Netflix. Call me if you get bored." The message felt significant in ways I was still piecing together. If Sophia was planning a quiet night at home, and Jake was supposedly working late, then who was he meeting for his anticipated evening out? Unless, of course, Sophia was lying too, and her text was meant to establish an alibi for her own absence from her usual routine. I decided to test my theory. At 7 o'clock, I drove to the neighborhood where Sophia and Marcus lived in their sprawling home in Westlake Hills. Their driveway was empty, both cars gone, despite Sophia's claim that she was having a quiet night in. The irony of the location choice felt deliberate, like Jake was systematically erasing the sacred moments of our relationship by recreating them with someone else. The drive home passed in a blur of anger, grief, and something that might have been relief. The uncertainty was over. The strange behaviors, the growing distance, the feeling that something fundamental had changed. It all made sense now. I wasn't losing my mind or being overly suspicious. I was just the last person to know about the betrayal that had been happening under my nose for months. Back in our house, surrounded by photos and mementos of the marriage I'd thought was real, I began planning my next move. Confronting Jake directly would likely result in denials, gaslighting, and promises to end the affair that might or might not be genuine. Confronting Sophia would probably yield similar results, with the added complication of potentially losing the evidence of their relationship if she warned Jake that I knew. But there was another option I hadn't considered until that moment: Marcus. If Sophia was cheating with Jake, then Marcus was facing the same betrayal I was, possibly without even knowing it yet. He deserved to know what his wife was doing, and together we might be able to gather enough evidence to confront both cheaters with undeniable proof of their affair. The idea of approaching Marcus felt both terrifying and necessary. I barely knew him beyond our group's social interactions. He was quiet, analytical, the kind of person who observed more than he spoke. His work in IT security suggested he was skilled at uncovering hidden information and protecting against deception. If anyone could help me document Jake and Sophia's affair comprehensively, it would be someone with his technical expertise and personal investment in exposing the truth. Saturday morning arrived with Jake sleeping late, exhausted from his evening out with Sophia. He was deeply asleep when I left for my usual weekend grocery run, but instead of heading to the store, I drove to the address I'd looked up for Marcus Chen. If I was going to blow up both of our marriages, I wanted to make sure I had an ally who understood exactly what we were dealing with. The conversation I was about to have would change everything, not just for me, but for all four of us. There would be no going back once Marcus knew what I'd discovered. No way to pretend that our comfortable group dynamic could continue unchanged. But the alternative, continuing to live in ignorance while Jake and Sophia carried on their affair, felt like a betrayal of my own dignity and intelligence. As I pulled into Marcus's driveway, I realized I was about to find out whether I was the only one who'd been kept in the dark, or whether Marcus had his own suspicions about his wife's recent behavior. Either way, the conversation we were about to have would determine how Jake and Sophia's betrayal would finally be exposed, and what kind of justice would be waiting for them when the truth came to light. Marcus answered his door in running clothes, clearly surprised to see me standing on his doorstep on a Saturday morning. The irony of the location choice felt deliberate, like Jake was systematically erasing the sacred moments of our relationship by recreating them with someone else. The drive home passed in a blur of anger, grief, and something that might have been relief. The uncertainty was over. The strange behaviors, the growing distance, the feeling that something fundamental had changed. It all made sense now. I wasn't losing my mind or being overly suspicious. I was just the last person to know about the betrayal that had been happening under my nose for months. Back in our house, surrounded by photos and mementos of the marriage I thought was real, I began planning my next move. Confronting Jake directly would likely result in denials, gaslighting, and promises to end the affair that might or might not be genuine. Confronting Sophia would probably yield similar results, with the added complication of potentially losing the evidence of their relationship if she warned Jake that I knew. But there was another option I hadn't considered until that moment: Marcus. If Sophia was cheating with Jake, then Marcus was facing the same betrayal I was, possibly without even knowing it yet. He deserved to know what his wife was doing, and together we might be able to gather enough evidence to confront both cheaters with undeniable proof of their affair. The idea of approaching Marcus felt both terrifying and necessary. I barely knew him beyond our group social interactions. He was quiet, analytical, the kind of person who observed more than he spoke. His work in IT security suggested he was skilled at uncovering hidden information and protecting against deception. If anyone could help me document Jake and Sophia's affair comprehensively, it would be someone with his technical expertise and personal investment in exposing the truth. Saturday morning arrived with Jake sleeping late, exhausted from his evening out with Sophia. He was deeply asleep when I left for my usual weekend grocery run, but instead of heading to the store, I drove to the address I'd looked up for Marcus Chen. If I was going to blow up both of our marriages, I wanted to make sure I had an ally who understood exactly what we were dealing with. The conversation I was about to have would change everything, not just for me but for all four of us. There would be no going back once Marcus knew what I'd discovered, no way to pretend that our comfortable group dynamic could continue unchanged. But the alternative, continuing to live in ignorance while Jake and Sophia carried on their affair, felt like a betrayal of my own dignity and intelligence. As I pulled into Marcus's driveway, I realized I was about to find out whether I was the only one who'd been kept in the dark, or whether Marcus had his own suspicions about his wife's recent behavior. Either way, the conversation we were about to have would determine how Jake and Sophia's betrayal would finally be exposed, and what kind of justice would be waiting for them when the truth came to light. Marcus answered his door in running clothes, clearly surprised to see me standing on his doorstep on a Saturday morning. Sophia encouraged this narrative, suggesting that Jake deserved better than someone who didn't appreciate his ambition and drive. They'd created a story that cast themselves as star-crossed lovers, trapped by mundane spouses who didn't understand their deeper connection. The betrayal felt multiplied as I read these exchanges. Not only were Jake and Sophia having an affair, but they were actively diminishing and dismissing their marriages to justify their behavior. Marcus and I weren't just being cheated on. We were being rewritten as obstacles to their happiness rather than people deserving of honesty and respect. Marcus watched me process the evidence with sympathetic patience, occasionally explaining technical details about how he'd obtained certain information or pointing out patterns in their behavior that I might have missed. His calm demeanor was reassuring, but I could see the controlled anger in his eyes, the carefully managed fury of someone who'd been systematically betrayed by the person he'd trusted most. "How long have you known?" I asked when I'd seen enough of their private communications to understand the full scope of their relationship. I suspected something 6 months ago, when Sophia started working late more often and became protective of her phone, Marcus explained. But I didn't have proof until I found hotel receipts in her car 3 months ago. Once I knew for certain, I decided to document everything before confronting her. I work in security. I know how people react when they're caught without overwhelming evidence. They deny, they gaslight, they destroy proof, and claim you're imagining things. His methodical approach made perfect sense, and I felt a surge of gratitude that someone had been taking this seriously while I'd been second-guessing my own instincts. Marcus had treated the affair like the violation it was, worthy of careful investigation and strategic response, rather than emotional confrontation that might yield temporary apologies, but no lasting accountability. "What's your plan?" I asked, realizing that Marcus had clearly thought beyond just gathering evidence to what he intended to do with it. Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd arrived, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "That depends on how much justice you're interested in pursuing. I can prove they've been stealing from both of our marriages. Jake's been using a secret credit card to fund their relationship, and Sophia's been lying to her real estate clients about property availability to create time for their meetings. We can expose them publicly, legally, and professionally if we coordinate our approach." The scope of what Marcus was suggesting began to sink in. This wasn't just about confronting two cheating spouses. This was about systematically dismantling the comfortable lives they'd built on lies and deception. Jake could lose his reputation in the construction industry if his affair became public knowledge. Sophia could face professional consequences if her real estate clients learned she'd been manipulating them to facilitate her personal schedule. But the alternative was allowing them to continue their betrayal until they decided to end their marriages on their own terms, probably with some narrative that cast Marcus and me as the problem, rather than acknowledging their own choices. They'd been rewriting our stories without our consent for months. Maybe it was time they faced some consequences for the damage they'd caused. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, and Marcus opened a second folder that contained what looked like a detailed battle plan for exposing an affair with maximum impact and minimum escape routes for the guilty parties. The next hour was spent planning the most comprehensive revenge scheme I'd ever been involved in, designed not just to end Jake and Sophia's affair, but to ensure they faced real consequences for the months of lies, manipulation, and betrayal they'd inflicted on their spouses. By the time I left Marcus's house, we had a timeline, specific assignments, and a shared understanding that Jake and Sophia were about to discover that some secrets carry a much higher price than they'd anticipated. Their affair was about to become the most expensive mistake either of them had ever made, and Marcus and I were going to make sure they understood exactly what they'd lost when they chose deception over honesty, selfishness over loyalty, and temporary pleasure over lasting trust. The revenge we planned would be thorough, public, and absolutely devastating to the carefully constructed lives they'd built on the foundation of our ignorance. Jake and Sophia thought they were so clever, maintaining their secret relationship while keeping their spouses oblivious and compliant. They were about to learn that underestimating the intelligence and determination of the people you betray is a dangerous miscalculation that can destroy everything you think you've gained through deception. Marcus's plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its thoroughness. We would spend the next 2 weeks gathering additional evidence while setting the stage for a coordinated exposure that would leave Jake and Sophia no room for denial or damage control. The beauty of Marcus's approach was that it didn't rely on emotional confrontations or tearful accusations that could be dismissed or minimized. Instead, it would present them with an undeniable public reckoning that forced them to face the consequences of their choices in front of everyone who mattered in their lives. The first phase involved what Marcus called confirmation and amplification. While we already had substantial evidence of the affair, we needed to document their upcoming activities to establish an unshakable timeline that would prevent them from claiming the relationship had ended or was somehow less serious than it appeared. Marcus had identified a pattern in their meetings that suggested they were planning something significant for the following weekend, possibly a romantic getaway that would provide perfect evidence of their ongoing commitment to each other rather than their marriages. Marcus had access to Sophia's email through their shared home computer, and what he discovered there exceeded our expectations for useful intelligence. Sophia had been planning what she described to Jake as a celebration of their 6-month anniversary, complete with reservations at a luxury resort in San Antonio and elaborate arrangements for alibis that would allow them to spend an entire weekend together without arousing suspicion from their spouses. The level of detail in their planning was staggering. Sophia had coordinated with a coworker to provide fake emergency calls that would give her an excuse to leave town for real estate business. Jake had arranged for his construction crew to believe he was attending a weekend training seminar in Houston. They'd even synchronized their stories about timing and expected return dates to ensure their spouses wouldn't accidentally discover inconsistencies in their cover stories. Reading their emails about the weekend getaway felt like watching criminals plan a heist, except the treasure they were stealing was the trust and emotional security of their marriages. They discussed every detail with the excitement of teenagers planning to skip school, completely disconnected from the impact their deception would have on the people who loved them. Their casual cruelty in discussing how to manipulate Marcus and me into accepting their lies revealed a level of contempt that went far beyond simple infidelity. Marcus printed every email, every text message coordination, every reservation confirmation. By the time Sophia and Jake left for their romantic weekend, we would have documentation that proved premeditation, ongoing commitment to the affair, and a deliberate conspiracy to deceive their spouses. More importantly, we would have evidence that this wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake they regretted, but a relationship they were actively celebrating and prioritizing over their marriages. While Marcus handled the digital evidence gathering, my assignment was to begin documenting the financial impact of Jake's deception. The secret credit card was just the beginning. Marcus's investigation had revealed that Jake had been systematically hiding money in ways that suggested he was preparing for a future that didn't include me. A savings account I'd never heard of contained nearly $20,000, funded by overtime pay and bonus checks that Jake had never mentioned. Investment accounts in his name alone held stock purchases that should have been discussed as part of our shared financial planning. The pattern suggested that Jake had been planning his exit from our marriage for far longer than the affair had been going on. He'd been gradually moving assets out of our joint control, building a financial foundation for a life without me, while maintaining the pretense that we were building a future together. Every conversation we'd had about retirement planning, vacation savings, or major purchases had been taking place while Jake was actively working to ensure I wouldn't benefit from the financial security we were supposedly creating as a team. Discovering the hidden accounts felt like uncovering evidence of a completely different crime than adultery. This was financial fraud on a personal level, a systematic theft of the economic partnership that marriage represents. Jake hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been stealing from our shared future while lying about his intentions for our relationship. The betrayal had multiple layers, each one more devastating as I understood how thoroughly he'd been planning to abandon everything we'd built together. Marcus helped me document everything, teaching me how to screenshot account information and create a paper trail that would be useful in divorce proceedings. His experience with digital security made him an expert at preserving evidence in ways that couldn't be challenged or dismissed later. We created encrypted backups of every piece of information, organized into folders that told the complete story of deception from multiple angles. Working with Marcus felt like having a partner in crime, except the crime we were planning was justice rather than deception. His calm competence was reassuring after months of feeling like I was losing my mind or overreacting to small inconsistencies that turned out to be major betrayals. Marcus understood the scope of what we were dealing with because he'd been systematically betrayed in exactly the same ways. Our shared experience of being lied to by people we trusted completely created an immediate bond that felt more authentic than many friendships I'd maintained for years. During our evidence-gathering phase, Marcus and I spent hours talking about our marriages, trying to understand how we'd missed the signs of our spouse's growing dissatisfaction and ultimate betrayal. Marcus revealed that Sophia had been complaining about their inability to conceive children, using their fertility struggles as justification for her unhappiness and eventual infidelity. She'd begun characterizing Marcus as emotionally unavailable and unsupportive, creating a narrative that cast her affair as seeking the understanding and passion that her marriage supposedly lacked. Similarly, Jake had apparently been telling Sophia that I was boring and predictable, focused too much on work and not enough on maintaining excitement in our relationship. According to their private messages, Jake felt taken for granted and unappreciated, describing our marriage as more like a business partnership than a romantic connection. The irony that he'd been systematically lying to me while complaining that I didn't understand or appreciate him was lost on neither Marcus nor me. What struck both of us was how Jake and Sophia had rewritten the history of their marriages to justify their affair. Problems that could have been addressed through communication or counseling had been transformed into insurmountable incompatibilities that made betrayal seem inevitable rather than chosen. They'd convinced themselves that their spouses were the obstacle to their happiness rather than acknowledging that they'd simply decided to prioritize their own desires over their commitments and responsibilities. Marcus's analysis of their communication patterns revealed something even more disturbing than the affair itself. Sophia and Jake had been actively undermining their marriages for months before the physical relationship began, creating emotional distance and dissatisfaction that made their eventual betrayal feel justified. They'd stopped investing in their relationships with their spouses while simultaneously building intimacy with each other, ensuring that their marriages would deteriorate enough to make the affair seem like a natural progression rather than a deliberate choice to violate their commitments. The psychological manipulation involved in this process was staggering. Both Marcus and I could identify moments when our spouses had deliberately picked fights or created conflict that pushed us away emotionally. Jake's growing criticism of my work schedule and social priorities hadn't been genuine concerns about our relationship. They'd been tactics to create distance that would make his affair easier to rationalize. Sophia's complaints about Marcus's introversion and analytical nature hadn't been attempts to improve their communication. They'd been efforts to build resentment that would justify seeking emotional connection elsewhere. Understanding the deliberate nature of their manipulation transformed my grief about the affair into anger, about the systematic way they'd damaged our marriages, while pretending to work on maintaining them. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a coordinated campaign to destroy the trust and intimacy in their marriages, while building a case for why their betrayal was somehow our fault rather than their choice. By the middle of the second week, Marcus and I had enough evidence to destroy Jake and Sophia's reputation, careers, and social standing, if we chose to use it strategically. But Marcus had a different idea that would be far more satisfying than simple exposure. Instead of just revealing their affair, we would create a situation where they exposed themselves in front of everyone who mattered to them, making their betrayal undeniable, while forcing them to face immediate consequences from their families, friends, and professional communities. The plan Marcus proposed was brilliant in its simplicity. Sophia and Jake were planning to attend Marcus and Sophia's anniversary party the weekend after their romantic getaway, a celebration that Sophia had been organizing for months as a way to maintain appearances about the health of her marriage. The guest list included both families, close friends, and several of Sophia's real estate clients who had become personal acquaintances. Jake's construction business partners and their wives would also be attending, along with most of our mutual social circle from years of couple friendships. Marcus suggested that we use the anniversary party as the venue for exposing the affair, but not through accusations or confrontations that could be denied or minimized. Instead, we would present the evidence as a surprise slideshow, ostensibly celebrating Marcus and Sophia's marriage, but actually documenting her affair with photographic proof that couldn't be disputed. The genius of this approach was that it would force Jake and Sophia to face the consequences of their betrayal in front of everyone whose opinion mattered to them, while preventing them from controlling the narrative or managing the damage through private conversations and selective disclosure. The slideshow would begin innocently enough, with photos from Marcus and Sophia's courtship and early marriage, gradually transitioning to more recent images that included social gatherings with Jake and me. Then, seamlessly woven into the presentation, would be the surveillance photos Marcus had taken of Sophia and Jake's romantic dinners, hotel visits, and intimate moments. The audience would slowly realize they were witnessing documentation of an affair rather than a celebration of marriage, creating a moment of collective understanding that would make denial impossible. Marcus had already created the presentation, timing each image for maximum impact and ensuring that the evidence was comprehensive enough to eliminate any possibility of alternative explanations. Hotel security footage, restaurant receipts with timestamps, text message screenshots with dates. Everything would be presented chronologically to show the development and progression of the affair over months of deliberate deception. The beauty of this approach was that it would force Jake and Sophia to confront their betrayal in the most humiliating possible circumstances, surrounded by people whose respect and approval they valued. Their families would see the evidence simultaneously, eliminating their ability to control how the information was shared, or to create different versions of events for different audiences. Their professional reputations would be damaged immediately, as clients and business partners witnessed their willingness to lie and manipulate the people closest to them. Most importantly, Marcus and I would be positioned as the wronged parties who had discovered betrayal, rather than vindictive spouses, making accusations that could be dismissed as jealousy or paranoia. The evidence would speak for itself, requiring no interpretation or explanation from us. Jake and Sophia would be forced to account for their choices in front of everyone whose opinion mattered to them, while Marcus and I maintained our dignity and credibility throughout the process. The week leading up to their romantic getaway passed slowly, as Marcus and I finalized our preparations for the anniversary party confrontation. We coordinated our alibis for the additional surveillance we needed to conduct, ensured that all our evidence was properly organized and backed up, and prepared for the various ways Jake and Sophia might react once their affair was exposed publicly. Marcus had contingency plans for every possible response, from complete denial to attempts to leave the party before the slideshow concluded. His background in security had taught him to anticipate multiple scenarios and prepare countermeasures that would prevent the targets of an investigation from escaping accountability. Jake and Sophia were about to discover that their betrayal had been uncovered by someone with the professional skills and personal motivation to ensure they faced comprehensive consequences for their choices. As the weekend of their romantic getaway approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread about what was coming. Part of me still hoped for some alternative explanation that would preserve my marriage and friendship, even though the evidence made such hope irrational. But a larger part of me was eager to see Jake and Sophia face the consequences of their systematic deception, to watch them account for their choices in front of people whose respect they valued. The affair had been conducted in secrecy, allowing them to enjoy the excitement of their relationship, while avoiding responsibility for the damage they were causing. The anniversary party would strip away that protective secrecy, forcing them to confront the reality that their actions had consequences beyond their immediate pleasure. Marcus and I were about to give them a lesson in accountability that would reshape their understanding of what betrayal actually costs when the people you've wronged refuse to suffer in silence. Their romantic weekend would be their last moment of stolen happiness, before facing the full weight of what they'd destroyed through their selfish choices. When they returned from San Antonio, glow with the satisfaction of their successful deception, they would walk directly into a situation designed to expose every lie they'd told and every manipulation they'd employed to maintain their affair. The countdown to their public reckoning had begun, and Marcus and I were ready to ensure that Jake and Sophia learned exactly what happened when they underestimated the intelligence, determination, and capacity for strategic revenge of the people they'd betrayed. Their affair was about to become the most expensive mistake either of them had ever made, and we were going to make sure the lesson was unforgettable. The weekend Jake and Sophia spent in San Antonio passed with agonizing slowness. I maintained the pretense of normalcy, texting Jake about his supposed training seminar, and receiving responses clearly written by someone lounging poolside at a luxury resort rather than sitting through construction industry workshops. His messages were brief and distracted, peppered with details about hotel conference rooms and training modules that Marcus had already confirmed didn't exist in any legitimate seminar program. Meanwhile, Marcus tracked their actual activities through the digital footprints they were too careless or too confident to hide. Credit card charges at expensive restaurants, social media check-ins at romantic locations, even a couple's massage at the resort spa, they documented their affair weekend like tourists celebrating a honeymoon, completely oblivious to the fact that their every move was being recorded by the husband they were betraying. The most damning evidence came from Sophia herself, who couldn't resist sharing photos of their getaway on her private social media accounts. Pictures of champagne glasses raised in romantic toasts, sunset shots from their hotel balcony, Intimate dinner settings for two at restaurants Jake had never taken me to in 8 years of marriage. She was so confident in her deception that she was literally creating evidence of her betrayal while believing herself completely safe from discovery. Marcus printed every photo, every receipt, every digital trace of their romantic weekend. By Sunday evening, when they were driving back to Austin in separate cars to maintain their alibis, we had comprehensive documentation of a couple celebrating their relationship rather than two people consumed by guilt about their betrayal. Their behavior confirmed what their private messages had already revealed. This wasn't a moment of weakness they regretted, but a relationship they were proud of and committed to maintaining regardless of the cost to their marriages. Sunday night brought Jake home with the elaborate story he'd rehearsed about his weekend training experience. He described sessions on new construction techniques and safety protocols, with the kind of detail that suggested careful preparation rather than genuine memory. He'd even purchased a construction industry magazine at the airport to support his cover story, leaving it strategically placed on his nightstand, where I would see evidence of his supposed educational weekend. The performance was flawless except for one crucial detail. Jake was happy in a way he hadn't been in months. His enthusiasm wasn't about learning new job skills, but about having spent 3 uninterrupted days with the woman he loved without the stress of maintaining deception. He hummed while unpacking his suitcase, smiled at random moments during our conversation, and showed more physical affection toward me than he had in weeks, probably overcompensating for the guilt of his extended betrayal. That affection felt like another layer of manipulation, a calculated gesture designed to throw me off any suspicion I might have developed during his absence. Jake was touching me, kissing me, and expressing love while still glowing from his romantic weekend with my best friend. The cruelty of using intimate gestures as a tool for maintaining deception revealed a level of emotional manipulation that transformed my hurt into cold, focused anger. Monday and Tuesday passed with Marcus and me finalizing our preparations for the anniversary party confrontation. The slideshow was complete, professionally edited to create maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability until the moment when the affair evidence appeared. Marcus had tested the presentation multiple times, ensuring that the transitions were seamless and the timing was perfect for the audience to fully process what they were seeing before moving to the next piece of evidence. We coordinated our roles for the evening carefully. I would arrive at the party with Jake, playing the supportive friend helping to celebrate Marcus and Sophia's marriage. Marcus would handle the technical aspects of the presentation, while I monitored Jake and Sophia's reactions and prevented them from leaving before the slideshow concluded. We had backup copies of all evidence stored in multiple locations, ensuring that any attempt to destroy or suppress the information would be futile. The guest list for the party read like a catalog of everyone whose opinion mattered in Jake and Sophia's lives. Both sets of parents, siblings, close friends from college, professional colleagues, and neighbors who had become genuine friends over the years. Marcus had deliberately maintained the celebration atmosphere in his planning, ensuring that attendance would be high and that everyone would be relaxed and unprepared for the bombshell that was coming. Wednesday evening brought unexpected intelligence from Marcus's continued monitoring of Sophia's digital communications. She and Jake were planning to use the anniversary party as an opportunity for a public display of their secret relationship, believing that they could steal moments together under the cover of the celebration without arousing suspicion. Text messages between them discussed plans for private conversations, discreet touches, and even a stolen kiss in Marcus's home office, while the party continued downstairs. The arrogance of planning to conduct their affair in the home of the husband they were betraying, surrounded by friends and family who trusted them completely, revealed a level of contempt for Marcus and me that exceeded anything I had imagined. They weren't just continuing their relationship despite the risk of discovery. They were actively enjoying the thrill of conducting it under the noses of the people they were deceiving. Their plans for the party also included coordination about their next romantic getaway, a week-long trip to Colorado that would require even more elaborate alibis and cover stories. Sophia had already begun laying the groundwork with fake real estate conferences and client obligations, while Jake was preparing stories about construction projects in distant cities. They were planning their future together while maintaining the facade of committed spouses, treating their marriages as convenient covers for their actual relationship, rather than commitments deserving of honesty and respect. Reading their casual discussions about how to manage their deception while planning their next betrayal crystallized my understanding of what Marcus and I were really dealing with. This wasn't a couple struggling with unexpected feelings or fighting against unwanted attraction. This was two people who had decided that their desires mattered more than their commitments, and who had developed sophisticated systems for pursuing what they wanted while avoiding consequences for their choices. Thursday morning brought the final piece of evidence we needed when Marcus intercepted a phone call between Sophia and her sister, in which she described her marriage as, quote, essentially over, and spoke about Jake as the love of her life who made her understand what she'd been missing in her relationship with Marcus. The call confirmed that Sophia wasn't planning to end her affair or work on her marriage. She was planning to eventually leave Marcus for Jake once they figured out how to manage the transition without losing financial security or social standing. Similarly, Jake had confided in his brother about feeling trapped in a marriage that no longer fulfilled him, and hinted about having met someone who made him realize what real love felt like. Both of them were already emotionally divorced from their spouses while maintaining the legal and social benefits of marriage, until they could transition to their preferred relationship without suffering significant consequences. This revelation transformed the anniversary party confrontation from an exposure of infidelity into the prevention of an even more elaborate deception. Jake and Sophia weren't just having an affair. They were planning to systematically dismantle their marriages while positioning themselves as the victims of relationships that had naturally run their course, rather than as people who had chosen betrayal over honesty. They intended to control the narrative of their divorces, probably casting Marcus and me as incompatible partners who couldn't meet their emotional needs, rather than as spouses who had been systematically deceived and manipulated. Friday evening arrived with final preparations for the party that would end Jake and Sophia's affair and expose the full scope of their deception. Marcus had arranged for a professional photographer to document the event, ostensibly to capture memories of the celebration, but actually to ensure that Jake and Sophia's reactions to the slideshow exposure would be permanently recorded. Their humiliation and accountability would be preserved for posterity, making it impossible for them to later claim that their betrayal had been less significant than it appeared. I chose my outfit carefully, elegant enough to fit the celebration atmosphere, but practical enough to allow me to remain composed during what would undoubtedly be an emotionally volatile situation. The goal was to project strength and dignity while watching my marriage and friendship explode in front of everyone I cared about. Jake complimented my appearance with genuine warmth, probably thinking about how proud he would be to show me off at the party while secretly planning to steal moments with Sophia throughout the evening. The drive to Marcus and Sophia's house felt surreal, with Jake making casual conversation about the party while I sat beside him, knowing that this would be the last social event we attended as a married couple. His excitement about seeing friends and celebrating Marcus and Sophia's anniversary was genuine, completely disconnected from any awareness that he was driving toward his own public exposure and humiliation. Marcus and Sophia's home was beautifully decorated for the celebration, with string lights in the backyard, elegant table settings, and a professional bartender serving drinks that suggested no expense had been spared for this final performance of their marriage. Sophia greeted guests at the door wearing a stunning dress that I later realized had been purchased for her romantic weekend with Jake, now repurposed as celebration attire for the marriage she was actively destroying. The early part of the evening proceeded exactly as planned, with guests mingling, sharing stories about Marcus and Sophia's relationship, and offering toasts to their continued happiness. Jake and Sophia maintained perfect decorum, interacting with appropriate spousal affection while stealing glances and subtle touches that I now recognized as their established pattern for conducting their affair in public settings. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus called for everyone's attention and announced that he had prepared a special slideshow to commemorate their marriage and thank everyone for celebrating with them. The guests gathered in the living room, wine glasses in hand, expecting a sentimental journey through Marcus and Sophia's relationship that would provide the perfect emotional climax to the evening's celebration. The presentation began innocently enough, with photos from Marcus and Sophia's college years, their engagement, wedding day, and early married life. The audience responded with appreciative murmurs and knowing smiles, recognizing themselves in various photos and remembering shared experiences from the couple's relationship journey. Sophia beamed with pleasure at the attention, and Marcus's apparent gesture of love and appreciation. Then the tone began to shift. Photos from recent months appeared on screen. Images of social gatherings and group dinners that included Jake and me, but with a focus that seemed oddly concentrated on interactions between Sophia and Jake. The audience continued watching with mild interest, not yet recognizing that they were seeing evidence rather than celebration. The transition was so smooth that it took several minutes for the guests to realize what they were actually viewing. Surveillance photos of Sophia and Jake at restaurants, walking hand in hand through hotel parking lots, embracing in intimate settings that clearly weren't group social gatherings. The audience's murmurs of appreciation gradually died away as understanding dawned that they were witnessing documentation of an affair rather than a marriage celebration. Credit card receipts appeared on screen with highlighted charges that corresponded to the romantic restaurant photos. Text message screenshots showed Jake and Sophia planning their deceptions and expressing love for each other while complaining about their spouses. Hotel registration records confirmed their weekend getaway with billing details that eliminated any possibility of innocent explanation. The silence in the room was deafening as friends and family processed what they were seeing. Sophia's face went white as she recognized her own handwriting in text messages that were being displayed for her parents, siblings, and professional colleagues to read. Jake stood frozen beside me, his expression cycling through shock, denial, and growing panic as the evidence accumulated beyond any possibility of alternative explanation. Marcus's voice remained calm and professional as he provided brief explanations for the more technical evidence, describing how he had discovered the affair and documenting his investigation with the thoroughness of someone presenting findings to a security review board. His composure throughout the presentation emphasized that this wasn't an emotional outburst or unfounded accusation, but a methodical revelation of systematically gathered proof. The slideshow concluded with a timeline that showed the affair's progression alongside lies Jake and Sophia had told their spouses during the same period. Their romantic weekend photos were displayed next to screenshots of the fake explanations they had provided about training seminars and business conferences. The contrast between their public celebration of betrayal and their elaborate deceptions created a narrative that eliminated any sympathy the audience might have felt for their situation. When the lights came back up, the room remained silent except for the sound of Sophia sobbing quietly in her chair. Jake appeared to be in shock, staring at the blank screen as if hoping the evidence would disappear if he focused hard enough. Their parents looked devastated, clearly struggling to reconcile the children they thought they knew with the people who had been revealed through months of calculated deception. Marcus addressed the room with dignified composure, explaining that he and I had discovered our spouse's affair through careful investigation and had chosen this method of exposure to ensure that everyone who cared about honesty and accountability understood the full scope of what had been happening. He emphasized that this wasn't about revenge or humiliation, but about ensuring that Jake and Sophia faced appropriate consequences for their choices, rather than being allowed to control the narrative through selective disclosure and managed revelations. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Both sets of parents demanded immediate explanations that Jake and Sophia were unable to provide, beyond stammered apologies and claims that the affair wasn't as serious as it appeared. Their professional colleagues excused themselves from the party with expressions that suggested significant career consequences would follow. Friends who had trusted them for years gathered their belongings and left without saying goodbye, clearly disgusted by the level of deception they had witnessed. Jake's construction business partner pulled him aside for a conversation that ended with Jake removing his company truck keys and being informed that his employment was terminated immediately. Sophia's real estate mentor made a phone call that everyone could overhear, discussing emergency procedures for transferring her clients to other agents due to, quote, personal conduct issues that compromise professional credibility. Within 2 hours, the party had completely dispersed, leaving Marcus and me alone with Jake and Sophia in the wreckage of their exposed affair. The couple who had been so confident in their ability to manage their deception sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that their betrayal had consequences extending far beyond their marriages, into every aspect of their personal and professional lives. Jake tried to speak to me privately, beginning with the standard affair script about never meaning for this to happen and promising to end the relationship immediately. I cut him off with a simple statement that I had already filed for divorce and that any further communication should go through my attorney. The relief I felt in finally being honest about what I knew and what I intended to do was overwhelming after months of pretending to believe his lies. Sophia's attempts to explain herself to Marcus were equally futile. He responded to her tears and promises with the same calm professionalism he had displayed throughout the evening, informing her that divorce papers would be served Monday morning, and that she had until the end of the week to move out of their home. His preparation and decisiveness made it clear that this confrontation was the culmination of careful planning, rather than an impulsive emotional response. The drive home with Jake was conducted in complete silence. He seemed to understand that anything he said would only make his situation worse, and I had no interest in providing him with opportunities to practice damage control that might be useful in future conversations with lawyers or family members. Our marriage was over, and we both knew it. Over the following weeks, the consequences of the anniversary party exposure continued to unfold exactly as Marcus had predicted. Jake and Sophia's affair became public knowledge throughout our social and professional circles, destroying their reputations and eliminating their ability to control how their betrayal was perceived or discussed. They faced immediate and comprehensive accountability for their choices rather than being allowed to gradually reveal their relationship on their own terms. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, with the evidence Marcus and I had gathered making it impossible for Jake or Sophia to contest the circumstances that had ended our marriages. Both of them lost significant financial security in the settlements, as courts don't look favorably on spouses who systematically deceive and defraud their partners. Their dreams of transitioning seamlessly from affair to legitimate relationship were replaced by the reality of starting over with damaged reputations and diminished resources. Marcus and I maintained our unlikely partnership throughout the legal process, sharing information and strategies that ensured both divorces resulted in fair settlements that reflected the betrayal we had endured. Our shared experience of systematic deception had created a bond that surprised both of us. We understood each other's anger, grief, and determination to ensure accountability in ways that no one else in our lives could match. 6 months after the anniversary party, Marcus and I had both finalized our divorces and begun building new lives free from the spouses who had treated our trust as a convenience to be exploited, rather than a gift to be treasured. Jake and Sophia had eventually moved in together, but their relationship struggled under the weight of the reputation and financial damage their affair had caused. The excitement of forbidden romance had been replaced by the practical realities of life as a couple known for betraying the people who had loved them most. The lesson Jake and Sophia learned was one that Marcus and I had been determined to teach: that betrayal carries a price that extends far beyond the immediate pleasure of deception. Their affair had cost them their marriages, their reputations, their financial security, and the respect of everyone whose opinion they valued. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that underestimating the intelligence and determination of the people you betray is a mistake that can destroy everything you think you've gained through dishonesty. Marcus and I had proven that victims of betrayal don't have to suffer in silence or accept whatever narrative their cheating spouses choose to provide. Sometimes justice requires careful planning, strategic thinking, and the courage to expose deception publicly, rather than handling it through private confrontations that allow manipulators to control the consequences of their choices. The anniversary party's slideshow had given Jake and Sophia exactly what they deserved: a moment of truth that stripped away their ability to lie, manipulate, or escape accountability for the systematic way they had betrayed the people who had trusted them completely. Their affair was over, their reputations were destroyed, and their understanding of what betrayal actually costs had been permanently and unforgettably corrected. The months following the anniversary party brought revelations that extended far beyond the immediate destruction of Jake and Sophia's affair. As Marcus and I navigated our respective divorces, we discovered that their betrayal had been even more systematic and calculating than we'd initially understood. What had seemed like a passionate affair driven by overwhelming attraction revealed itself to be a carefully orchestrated plan that had been in development for over a year before their physical relationship began. Marcus's forensic analysis of Sophia's digital communications uncovered a disturbing timeline that showed deliberate manipulation dating back to long before their first romantic encounter. Sophia had been strategically undermining her marriage to Marcus, while simultaneously working to create problems between Jake and me, positioning herself as the understanding friend who could provide Jake with the emotional support his wife apparently couldn't offer. Text messages between Sophia and her sister revealed conversations about Project Jake, that began nearly 18 months before their affair became physical. Sophia had identified Jake as a target for a relationship upgrade, viewing him as more financially stable and socially connected than Marcus, whose introverted nature and steady but unexciting career had begun to feel limiting to her ambitions. The affair wasn't spontaneous passion. It was a calculated attempt to trade up to a better situation, while maintaining financial security until the transition could be completed safely. Even more shocking was the discovery that Sophia had been actively sabotaging my marriage through subtle manipulations designed to create distance between Jake and me. She'd been encouraging Jake's complaints about my work schedule, while simultaneously advising me to focus more on my career during our coffee conversations. She'd suggested activities and social events that would keep Jake and me apart while creating opportunities for her to spend time alone with him. Every piece of marriage advice she'd given me had been designed to weaken my relationship while strengthening her position as Jake's confidant and eventual romantic partner. The level of premeditation involved in Sophia's approach was breathtaking. She'd studied my marriage like a hostile takeover specialist analyzing a target company, identifying weaknesses and pressure points that could be exploited to create the conditions she needed for her plan to succeed. Her friendship with me hadn't been genuine for over a year. It had been intelligence gathering that allowed her to understand exactly how to manipulate both Jake and me to achieve her desired outcome. Marcus discovered that Sophia had even researched divorce laws and asset protection strategies, preparing for the eventual dissolution of both marriages in ways that would maximize her financial advantage. She'd been planning to claim emotional abuse and neglect in her divorce from Marcus, while positioning herself as the victim of Jake's marriage, who had provided him with the love and understanding his wife couldn't give him. The entire narrative of their eventual relationship was going to be built on lies about the marriages they were destroying. Jake's complicity in this manipulation was equally disturbing. Phone records showed that he'd been in regular contact with Sophia for months before their affair became romantic, discussing his frustrations with our marriage and receiving advice that consistently encouraged him to view me as the problem, rather than working to address issues through honest communication. Sophia had been gradually convincing Jake that his unhappiness was my fault, while positioning herself as the solution to problems she was actively helping to create. The financial investigation revealed that Jake's secret savings account had been funded not just by hidden overtime pay but by money he'd been systematically skimming from our joint household budget over nearly 2 years. Small amounts that I'd never noticed were missing had been redirected to build his escape fund, while Sophia provided advice on how to move money without creating obvious paper trails that would alert me to his financial planning for a future without me. Their coordination extended to professional sabotage as well. Sophia had been discouraging potential clients from working with my design firm, while steering them toward competitors, gradually weakening my business while Jake complained about my work stress affecting our marriage. She'd been attacking my financial independence while he criticized my professional dedication, creating a systematic campaign to undermine both my personal and professional security. The revelation that my best friend had been actively working to destroy my marriage and career while pretending to support me felt like a betrayal that went beyond simple infidelity. Sophia hadn't just stolen my husband, she'd been systematically dismantling my entire life, while I trusted her with my deepest concerns and vulnerabilities. Every conversation about my marriage struggles had been feeding information to someone who was using it to engineer my downfall. Marcus's investigation also uncovered the full scope of their future plans, which extended far beyond simply leaving their current spouses for each other. They'd been discussing moving to a different city where their reputations wouldn't be damaged by the circumstances of their relationship, using the money Jake had hidden and the proceeds from selling Marcus's house to fund a fresh start where no one would know they'd destroyed 2 marriages to be together. Sophia had already begun laying groundwork for this plan by establishing connections with real estate firms in Denver and Portland, cities far enough from Austin to provide complete separation from the consequences of their betrayal. Jake had been researching construction opportunities in the same areas, identifying companies that might hire someone with his experience without requiring extensive local references that could reveal the circumstances of his departure from his current position. Their level of planning revealed that they'd never intended to face accountability for their choices. The affair was just the beginning of an elaborate scheme to escape their current lives without suffering consequences for the betrayal and manipulation they'd employed to achieve their goals. They'd been planning to disappear into new identities as a legitimate couple, leaving Marcus and me to deal with the emotional and financial wreckage of their systematic deception. The discovery of these extended plans transformed the anniversary party exposure from simple justice into the prevention of an even more elaborate crime. Without Marcus's investigation and our coordinated response, Jake and Sophia would have eventually executed their escape plan, leaving their spouses to discover the truth only after they were safely established in new lives built on stolen money and carefully constructed lies. During the divorce proceedings, additional evidence emerged that painted an even darker picture of their relationship. Sophia had been encouraging Jake to take unnecessary financial risks with our joint assets, including investments and business ventures that would have left me financially vulnerable while building his independent wealth. She'd been coaching him on how to hide income and assets in ways that would make divorce settlements more favorable to him and devastating to me. Their private communications revealed casual discussions about how to manipulate their spouses into accepting blame for the marriage's failures, ensuring that Jake and Sophia could present themselves as victims rather than perpetrators when they eventually went public with their relationship. They'd been practicing conversations and developing narratives that would cast Marcus and me as inadequate partners who had driven them to seek happiness elsewhere. The psychological manipulation involved in their approach was perhaps more damaging than the financial or romantic betrayal. Both Marcus and I had been gaslit for months, encouraged to doubt our own perceptions, and accept responsibility for problems that were being deliberately created and amplified by the people we trusted most. Our spouses had been systematically undermining our confidence and self-worth, while positioning themselves as the reasonable partners trying to save marriages that their affair partners were sabotaging. As the legal proceedings progressed, Jake and Sophia's relationship began deteriorating under the pressure of public exposure and financial consequences. Their romance had thrived on secrecy, excitement, and the thrill of getting away with elaborate deception. When forced to function as a legitimate couple facing real-world consequences for their choices, they discovered that their connection wasn't as strong as they'd believed. Jake struggled with the loss of his professional reputation and the financial burden of the divorce settlement, which had awarded me significant compensation for his financial fraud and hidden assets. Sophia faced similar consequences, losing her real estate license due to ethical violations related to manipulating clients and colleagues to facilitate her affair schedule. Their dreams of escaping to a new city and starting fresh were replaced by the reality of rebuilding their careers and finances, while carrying the reputation of people who had betrayed their spouses in spectacularly public ways. The stress of their changed circumstances revealed personality traits that hadn't been apparent during the excitement of their secret relationship. Jake's charming confidence transformed into self-pity and blame-shifting as he struggled to accept responsibility for the consequences of his choices. Sophia's vivacious social personality became manipulative and calculating as she attempted to control damage to her reputation through strategic friendships and carefully managed public appearances. Marcus and I watched their relationship implode with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Neither of us took pleasure in their unhappiness, but we felt vindicated that their betrayal hadn't led to the happily ever after they'd been planning at our expense. Their affair had been built on the fantasy that they were star-crossed lovers held back by inadequate spouses, but reality proved that they were simply selfish people whose relationship couldn't survive without the excitement of deception and the financial security provided by the marriages they'd been destroying. 6 months after the anniversary party, Jake and Sophia's relationship ended in a bitter breakup that involved police intervention when their argument over shared expenses turned into accusations of theft and property destruction. The couple who had been so confident in their superior connection couldn't maintain their partnership when faced with the practical challenges of building a life together honestly. Jake made several attempts to reconcile with me during this period, apparently believing that our marriage could be restored now that his affair was over. His approach revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the damage he'd caused and the finality of the choices he'd made. He seemed to believe that ending the affair was sufficient to repair a marriage that had been systematically undermined by over a year of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. I had no interest in reconciliation with someone who had demonstrated such capacity for sustained deception and manipulation. The Jake who had betrayed me wasn't a momentary aberration. He was the real person who had been hidden beneath years of performed husband behavior. The man I'd fallen in love with and married had been largely fictional, a character Jake had created to maintain access to the benefits of marriage while pursuing his actual desires elsewhere. Marcus faced similar attempts at reconciliation from Sophia, who alternated between claiming the affair had been a temporary mental breakdown and suggesting that they could rebuild their marriage stronger than before. Her complete inability to acknowledge the systematic nature of her betrayal or take responsibility for the calculated way she'd manipulated both marriages made any prospect of reconciliation impossible. The divorce settlements reflected the severity of their financial and emotional crimes against their spouses. Both Jake and Sophia lost significant assets and faced ongoing financial obligations that would remind them of the cost of their betrayal for years to come. The courts weren't sympathetic to their claims that the affairs had been emotional mistakes rather than calculated campaigns of deception and manipulation. As Marcus and I rebuilt our lives independently, we maintained a friendship that had been forged through shared trauma and mutual support during our darkest period. Our partnership in exposing and surviving our spouse's betrayal had created a bond that was based on genuine understanding and respect, rather than the performed intimacy that had characterized our failed marriages. Neither of us was interested in a romantic relationship, having learned too much about the capacity for deception that even long-term partners could demonstrate. But our friendship provided emotional support and practical assistance as we navigated the challenges of starting over in middle age with damaged trust and financial resources depleted by divorce settlements. Marcus returned to dating gradually, applying the same methodical approach to relationship building that he'd used to expose Sophia's affair. His experience with systematic betrayal had taught him to verify rather than trust, to look for evidence of character rather than accepting performed personality traits at face value. He approached new relationships with appropriate caution, while remaining open to the possibility that genuine connection could exist without deception. I focused on rebuilding my design business, which had suffered during the months of dealing with the affair discovery and divorce proceedings. The professional relationships that Sophia had sabotaged required careful rebuilding, but my reputation for honest dealing and quality work eventually overcame the damage she'd caused through her manipulation of referrals and client relationships. The process of reconstruction taught both Marcus and me that betrayal, while devastating, wasn't necessarily permanent in its effects. We'd been systematically deceived and manipulated by people we'd trusted completely, but we'd also demonstrated our own capacity for strategic thinking, careful planning, and effective response to crisis. The skills we'd developed in exposing and surviving our spouse's betrayal became assets in rebuilding our professional and personal lives. 2 years after the anniversary party, I received a phone call from Jake asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss closure for our marriage. His request revealed continued misunderstanding about the nature of what had happened between us and his role in its destruction. There was no closure needed for a marriage that had been systematically destroyed through calculated betrayal. There was only the ongoing process of building a better life without someone who had proven themselves incapable of honesty or genuine partnership. I declined his invitation and blocked his number, having no interest in providing him with absolution or the opportunity to practice a redemption narrative that might be useful in future relationships. Jake's betrayal had taught me that some people view accountability as negotiable and consequences as temporary inconveniences rather than learning opportunities. I had no obligation to participate in his efforts to minimize or reframe what he'd done. Marcus received similar contact attempts from Sophia, who had apparently convinced herself that their marriage could be restored through counseling and renewed commitment to honesty. Her outreach revealed the same inability to grasp the magnitude of her betrayal that had characterized her affair planning. Someone who could systematically manipulate and deceive for over a year wasn't experiencing a temporary lapse in judgment. They were revealing their true character under pressure. The final chapter of Jake and Sophia's story came 3 years after their affair's exposure, when both of them had moved to different cities and attempted to rebuild their lives independently. Jake had found work with a smaller construction company in Phoenix, while Sophia had transitioned to a different career entirely after losing her real estate license. Both were struggling financially and professionally, still dealing with the long-term consequences of their choices. Their attempts to escape accountability through geographical relocation had been only partially successful. Professional networks in their industries were smaller and more interconnected than they'd anticipated, and their reputations for betraying spouses had followed them to their new locations. The digital age made it impossible to completely reinvent themselves without traces of their past behavior surfacing when potential employers or romantic partners conducted background research. Marcus and I had both moved forward successfully, building new lives that were more honest and fulfilling than the marriages we'd lost. Our experience with betrayal had taught us to value authenticity over performance, genuine connection over convenient partnership, and personal integrity over social convention. The pain of being systematically deceived had been transformed into wisdom about recognizing and responding to manipulation. The revenge we'd achieved through the anniversary party exposure had provided immediate satisfaction, but the long-term justice came from watching Jake and Sophia face ongoing consequences for their choices, while Marcus and I built better lives through honest effort and authentic relationships. Their betrayal had revealed their true characters under pressure, while our response had demonstrated our capacity for strategic thinking, mutual support, and principled action in the face of devastating deception. The lesson that emerged from our experience was that betrayal often reveals more about the betrayer's character than about their victim's inadequacy. Jake and Sophia had chosen deception over communication, manipulation over honesty, and selfish pleasure over committed partnership. Their affair had been a symptom of their fundamental inability to maintain integrity under pressure, rather than evidence that their marriages had been inadequate or their spouses insufficient. Marcus and I had proven that victims of systematic betrayal didn't have to accept whatever narrative their deceiving spouses chose to provide. Through careful investigation, strategic planning, and coordinated response, we'd ensured that Jake and Sophia faced comprehensive accountability for their choices, rather than being allowed to escape consequences through continued manipulation and controlled disclosure. The anniversary party slideshow had been the beginning of their reckoning, not the end. The real justice had come through the years of professional, financial, and social consequences that followed their exposure, demonstrating that betrayal carries a price that extends far beyond the immediate pleasure of deception. Jake and Sophia had learned that underestimating the intelligence and determination of the people you betray is a mistake that can destroy everything you think you've gained through dishonesty. Our story had become a testament to the power of strategic response over emotional reaction, careful planning over impulsive confrontation, and mutual support over isolated suffering. The partnership that Marcus and I had formed to expose our spouse's betrayal had demonstrated that even the most devastating deception could be overcome through intelligence, determination, and refusal to accept the victim role that betrayers prefer their spouses to maintain. 5 years had passed since the anniversary party that changed everything, and I was standing in the lobby of a downtown Austin hotel, waiting for a business meeting that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of discovering Jake's betrayal. My design firm had not only recovered from Sophia's sabotage, but had grown into one of the most respected boutique agencies in Texas, with clients ranging from tech startups to established restaurant chains seeking authentic, innovative spaces that told compelling stories. The meeting I was attending involved a potential partnership with a major hospitality group looking to redesign their properties across the Southwest. It represented the kind of opportunity that would have felt like an impossible dream when I was struggling to rebuild my business and my life after divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me that my greatest professional success was happening in a hotel similar to the ones where Jake and Sophia had conducted their affair, but the parallel felt more like vindication than painful memory. Marcus had played an unexpected role in my business growth, though not in any way either of us had anticipated during those intense months of planning revenge and navigating divorce proceedings. His background in cybersecurity had evolved into consulting work for businesses needing to protect themselves from digital threats, and many of his clients required design services for offices and facilities that balanced security concerns with aesthetic appeal. His referrals had provided a steady stream of high-quality projects that appreciated both innovative design and meticulous attention to detail. Our friendship had deepened over the years into something that felt more like family than the performative intimacy that had characterized my marriage to Jake. We understood each other's triggers around trust and deception, celebrated each other's successes without competition or jealousy, and provided emotional support during the inevitable setbacks that came with rebuilding life after betrayal. Neither of us had any romantic interest in the other, but our bond had become one of the most authentic relationships either of us had ever experienced. The hotel meeting went better than I had hoped, with the hospitality group expressing enthusiasm for my portfolio and approach to creating spaces that felt both luxurious and welcoming. As I walked back to my car afterward, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that made my blood run cold when I read it. "I saw your name in the Business Journal article about the hotel project. Congratulations. I've been thinking about you and hoping we could talk. There are things I need to say that couldn't be said before. Jake." The message felt like a violation, an intrusion into the successful life I'd built without him. 5 years of healing, growth, and achievement suddenly felt fragile in the face of contact from someone who had systematically betrayed and manipulated me. I'd changed my phone number twice since the divorce to avoid exactly this kind of unwanted communication, but apparently Jake had been monitoring my professional progress and found a way to reach me when he saw fit. I screenshot the message and sent it to Marcus, who called immediately with the controlled anger I recognized from our revenge planning days. "How did he get your new number?" was his first question, followed by practical advice about blocking the contact and documenting it in case Jake's outreach escalated into harassment. Marcus's protective instincts had remained sharp over the years, and his immediate response reminded me why our partnership in exposing the affair had been so effective. That evening, as I sat in my renovated condo overlooking the lake, I reflected on how much my life had changed since the day I'd first suspected Jake's infidelity. The space around me represented everything I'd learned about creating beauty without compromise, choosing quality over quantity, and building something authentic rather than impressive. Every piece of furniture, every carefully selected artwork, every design choice reflected my own taste and values, rather than the compromises that had characterized my shared life with Jake. The Business Journal article Jake had referenced was a feature about emerging design firms that were reshaping Austin's commercial landscape. The photographer had captured me in my studio, surrounded by project sketches and material samples, looking confident and accomplished in ways that felt genuine rather than performed. Reading the article when it was published had given me a sense of pride in how far I'd traveled from the woman who had discovered her husband's affair while fighting to save her business from sabotage. Marcus stopped by later that evening with Thai takeout and wine, our established routine for processing any contact from our former spouses. Over the years, we'd both received occasional attempts at communication from Jake and Sophia, ranging from birthday messages to requests for meetings to discuss closure or forgiveness. Our response had always been consistent: complete silence and immediate blocking of any new contact methods they discovered. "What do you think he wants?" Marcus asked as we settled into my living room with our dinner. His analytical mind was already working through the implications of Jake's timing and approach, looking for patterns that might indicate whether this was isolated contact or the beginning of a more persistent campaign for my attention. I'd been wondering the same thing. The message's reference to, quote, "things that couldn't be said before," suggested Jake believed he had information or explanations that would somehow change my understanding of our marriage or his betrayal. The possibility that he was dealing with guilt, regret, or consequences that made him want to attempt some form of reconciliation felt both predictable and irrelevant to my current life. Maybe his relationship with Sophia really is over and he's realizing what he lost, I suggested. Or maybe he's in some kind of therapy that's convinced him that making amends is part of his healing process. Either way, I'm not interested in participating in his emotional recovery project. Marcus nodded approvingly. The best revenge really has been building something better without them. You don't owe him anything, especially not the opportunity to feel better about what he did by getting your forgiveness or understanding. The conversation reminded me of how much wisdom we'd both gained through surviving systematic betrayal. The experience had taught us to recognize manipulation tactics, trust our instincts about people's motivations, and prioritize our own emotional well-being over other people's desire for absolution or closure. Jake's message felt like another attempt to control the narrative of our relationship, to position himself as someone worthy of continued consideration, rather than as someone who had forfeited any claim to my attention through his choices. Over the following days, Jake's attempts to contact me intensified. Messages appeared on social media platforms I rarely used. Emails arrived at my business account despite my personal contact information being private. And flowers were delivered to my office with notes requesting just one conversation to discuss important information about our marriage. The escalation felt familiar from my research into stalking and harassment patterns during the aftermath of our divorce. Marcus suggested documenting everything while considering whether Jake's behavior warranted legal intervention. His persistence suggested either desperation or an inability to accept that his access to my life had been permanently revoked. The fact that he was monitoring my professional activities and using business publicity to justify contact felt like a continuation of the boundary violations that had characterized his affair. The turning point came when Jake appeared at my office building waiting in the lobby during what he somehow knew were my usual hours. My assistant called to warn me before I entered the building, allowing me to avoid the encounter while confirming that Jake's outreach had escalated into physical presence at my workplace. The violation of my professional space felt like a deliberate escalation designed to force interaction on his terms rather than respecting my clear lack of response to his other attempts. I called my attorney immediately, discussing options for legal protection against unwanted contact and harassment. The conversation reminded me of similar discussions during our divorce proceedings, when Jake had struggled to accept the finality of our marriage's end and had made various attempts to negotiate reduced consequences for his betrayal. His current behavior suggested that he still viewed my boundaries as suggestions rather than requirements. Marcus accompanied me to the police station where I filed a formal complaint about Jake's harassment and requested a restraining order based on his escalating attempts to force contact, despite my clear lack of interest in communication. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic and familiar with similar cases involving divorced spouses who refused to accept the permanent end of access to their former partners. The legal paperwork required detailed documentation of Jake's contact attempts and their impact on my sense of security and professional environment. Writing out the timeline of his messages, deliveries, and physical appearance at my workplace made the pattern of escalation clear and concerning. What Jake might have characterized as romantic persistence looked very different when documented as a series of boundary violations against someone who had explicitly ended all relationship with him. While waiting for the restraining order to be processed, I received a call from an unexpected source, Sophia. Her voice was hesitant and emotional as she explained that she was calling to warn me about Jake's current mental state and his intentions regarding our past relationship. The irony of receiving protective information from the woman who had systematically destroyed my marriage wasn't lost on me, but her obvious distress suggested this wasn't a casual conversation. "He's been obsessing about you for months," Sophia explained during our brief phone call. "Our relationship ended badly, and he's convinced himself that everything would have been different if he'd made better choices with you. He's been talking about proving that the affair was my fault, that I manipulated him into betraying you. I think he's planning to contact you with some kind of confession or apology that he believes will change how you remember your marriage." The information confirmed what I'd suspected about Jake's motivation for attempting contact. He was rewriting history again, this time casting himself as a victim of Sophia's manipulation rather than acknowledging his role as an active participant in systematic betrayal. His desire to reconnect with me wasn't based on genuine remorse or understanding of the damage he'd caused. It was another attempt to control the narrative of our relationship in ways that preserved his self-image as someone worthy of forgiveness and consideration. Sophia's willingness to warn me about Jake's plans suggested that their relationship had ended with bitter recriminations and mutual blame, rather than the passionate love they'd believed would justify their betrayal. The reality of building a life together without the excitement of deception had apparently revealed incompatibilities and character flaws that hadn't been apparent during their affair. Their relationship had thrived on the shared project of deceiving their spouses, but couldn't survive the ordinary challenges of honest partnership. "I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness or friendship," Sophia continued. "I know what I did was unforgivable, and I've had to live with the consequences of destroying my marriage and your trust. But Jake is in a different place mentally, and I think he might be dangerous if he's convinced himself that you owe him a conversation, or that he can somehow undo what happened between you." The warning felt genuine, based on Sophia's first-hand experience with Jake's ability to rationalize his behavior and refuse accountability for his choices. Her insight into his current mindset provided valuable context for understanding his escalating attempts to contact me, and suggested that ignoring him wasn't sufficient protection against his persistence. I thanked Sophia for the warning while making it clear that her call didn't change my opinion of her role in destroying my marriage, or create any possibility of future relationship between us. Her information was useful, but it didn't transform her from someone who had systematically betrayed me into someone I could trust or forgive. The damage she'd caused through her calculated manipulation of my marriage and friendship was permanent, regardless of her current regret or concern about Jake's behavior. The restraining order was granted within the week, legally prohibiting Jake from contacting me directly or indirectly, visiting my workplace or home, or using third parties to communicate on his behalf. The court's decision validated my concerns about his escalating behavior and provided legal consequences for any future attempts to violate my boundaries. Serving him with the order would make clear that his romantic narrative about our past relationship was legally recognized as harassment rather than legitimate courtship. Marcus celebrated the restraining order approval with champagne and takeout from our favorite restaurant, marking another victory in our ongoing campaign to maintain the boundaries we'd established after exposing our spouse's affair. His support throughout Jake's harassment campaign had been unwavering, providing both practical assistance and emotional validation that my concerns were reasonable and my responses appropriate. "You've built something amazing," Marcus said as we sat on my balcony, watching the sunset over the lake. "The business, this life, your independence, none of it has anything to do with Jake or what he destroyed. He's trying to insert himself back into a story he's no longer part of, but you've moved so far beyond who you were when you were married to him that his attempts to reconnect are almost pathetic." The observation resonated deeply because it captured something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated clearly. Jake's harassment felt like an intrusion from a different era of my life, when I'd been someone who needed his approval and attention to feel complete. The woman I'd become through rebuilding my business and my life had no use for the validation or closure he seemed to believe I was seeking. His inability to recognize how completely I'd moved beyond needing anything from him revealed how little he'd understood about the person he'd been married to. 6 months after the restraining order was issued, I received notification that Jake had been arrested for violating its terms by attempting to approach me at a professional networking event. Security footage showed him waiting outside the venue where I was speaking about sustainable design practices, apparently planning to ambush me after my presentation. His arrest resulted in jail time and additional legal restrictions that made clear the serious consequences of continuing to violate my boundaries. The arrest brought unexpected relief, not because I took pleasure in Jake's legal troubles, but because it demonstrated that the boundaries I'd established were enforceable, and that his attempts to force interaction would result in real consequences. The legal system had validated my right to live free from unwanted contact with someone who had systematically betrayed and manipulated me, regardless of his personal desire for reconciliation or closure. Marcus attended the court hearing where Jake was sentenced, providing moral support and serving as a witness to the harassment pattern that had led to the arrest. Seeing Jake in handcuffs and orange jumpsuit was surreal, a stark contrast to the confident construction foreman who had once shared my bed and my dreams. His transformation from trusted husband to convicted stalker felt like the natural progression of choices that had begun with his decision to lie to me about working late, while he met Sophia for romantic dinners. The judge's comments during sentencing reflected an understanding of domestic harassment patterns and the importance of protecting people from former partners who refuse to accept relationship boundaries. Jake's claim that he was trying to apologize and make amends was dismissed as irrelevant to the legal requirement that he respect my right to live without unwanted contact. His intentions, whether romantic or reconciliatory, didn't matter when measured against his actions in violating clearly established legal boundaries. After Jake's sentencing, I finally felt free to fully embrace the life I'd built without any shadow of his presence or potential interference. The restraining order had been an important legal protection, but his arrest and conviction provided psychological closure that allowed me to stop looking over my shoulder or worrying about unexpected encounters. Jake's transformation from my husband to my stalker to my legally restrained former spouse felt complete, with no possibility of future chapters that would require my participation or attention. The design firm continued growing, landing the hotel partnership, and expanding into residential projects that reflected my expertise in creating beautiful, functional spaces that told authentic stories. My professional reputation was built on integrity, creativity, and reliability, qualities that felt more valuable because I'd learned to recognize their absence in people who prioritized deception and manipulation over honest effort. Marcus and I maintained our friendship as one of the most important relationships in both our lives, built on shared experience, mutual respect, and complete honesty about our strengths and weaknesses. Neither of us was interested in romantic partnership with anyone, having learned too much about the human capacity for betrayal to risk that level of vulnerability again. But our friendship provided emotional support and intellectual companionship that felt more authentic than the marriages we'd lost. Looking back on the 5 years since discovering Jake's affair, I realized that his betrayal had inadvertently given me the opportunity to discover who I really was when freed from the compromise and accommodation that had characterized our marriage. The woman who had prioritized keeping Jake happy over pursuing her own ambitions had been replaced by someone who built success through her own efforts and maintained relationships based on mutual respect, rather than neediness or fear of abandonment. The anniversary party revenge that Marcus and I had orchestrated felt like ancient history, a necessary response to systematic betrayal that had served its purpose of ensuring accountability and preventing Jake and Sophia from controlling the narrative of their affair. The real victory hadn't been their public humiliation, but the lives we'd built afterward, demonstrating that betrayal could be survived, and even transformed into wisdom about recognizing authentic relationships and maintaining personal integrity under pressure. Jake's recent harassment campaign had been his final attempt to insert himself back into a story he was no longer part of, to somehow undo the consequences of choices that had permanently altered the trajectory of both our lives. His arrest and conviction marked the end of any connection between us, legal or otherwise, allowing me to move forward completely free from the man who had once promised to love me forever while systematically planning his escape from our marriage. The lesson I'd learned through surviving systematic betrayal was that some relationships end not because of mutual incompatibility or natural drift, but because one person reveals their true character under pressure, and that character proves incompatible with honesty, loyalty, and genuine partnership. Jake's affair had been a symptom of deeper issues with integrity and commitment that would have surfaced eventually in other ways if Sophia hadn't provided the specific opportunity for their expression. My life had become everything I'd hoped it could be when I was struggling to rebuild after divorce. Professionally successful, emotionally stable, and built on authentic relationships with people who shared my values about honesty and mutual respect. The happiness I'd found felt more solid than anything I'd experienced during my marriage, because it was based on my own efforts and choices, rather than dependence on someone else's continued affection and attention. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.